Go away, camera. Why are you still on?
That's
Clicking.
the opening.
Okay, there we go. Oh, you're recording. I never noticed when you're recording.
It can only be attributable to human error.
You're entering the paranormal.
He meddled in things that you people. He meddled in things. He meddled in things.
Where will we go next? This phantom from another time.
No one, Mr. Muller.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
That is one big pile of shit.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Daikaiju,
I'm Jasmine with
I'm Eli Watson.
and you're listening to
Cryptid.
Campfire.
Oh.
Whoa.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very special spooky October edition of Cryptid Campfire.
Yes. We're going to be covering some of our favorite spooks and haunts for this month.
Oh yeah, it's time. 2020's been a little rough, but we got Halloween coming around the corner to save the day.
Oh, yes. And we're kicking it off with Jasmine's favorite spooky guy, vampires. Wow, that was...
When did I ever make this claim?
The first time we met you. Hi,
in
I'm Jasmine
episode
Wentworth,
72.
and my favorite cryptid is the vampire.
Which I guess let's put that on the record first thing first. Vampires are not technically cryptids.
Mm.
They
They're
are the undead.
the undead.
The question being, what if Bigfoot became a vampire? Would he be a cryptid, or would he be something else?
He would be basically a unicorn. You know, a rarity among rarities.
And that's what we're covering today. Bigfoot, bitten by Dracula, in today's episode. But yeah, let's kick it off with I don't know if the audience at home has heard of these because they're a little rare. It's kind of a little niche topic, but vampires, what are they?
Yeah, I don't know, Alex. We're gonna have to go with Jasmine on this one.
Oh?
Yeah, Jasmine, what's a vampire? Tell us what it is, or I guess, yeah, where it is and what it do.
Well, so vampires, I mean, they're kind of a worldwide phenomenon. They're not really locked down into one geographical location.
Mm-hmm.
We are probably going to be focusing a little bit on Europe and some United States areas a little bit later when we get into sightings and legends and whatnot. But overall, vampires are kind of, everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, we've already kind of talked about a vampire on the show. Yes, no?
You're going to have to refresh my memory.
The Vampire of Mocha,
I wasn't there for that.
the Chupacabra episode.
I was gonna say,
Oh!
Jasmine, that was the second episode.
Oh man, I thought that you guys were talking like about a tall tale or something.
Nay.
I was gonna say, if that wasn't you, then who did we record that episode with?
It was my doppelganger.
Whoa. Yasmina May with.
So, description of a vampire. It's gonna sound a little bit redundant in some ways because I feel like a vampire is one of those monsters that kind of everybody can identify. Everyone knows what a vampire is. If you don't, we're here to educate you and let you know. I mean, where do we start? There are many different characteristics of vampires in vampire legends. Main characteristic being they drink human blood, draining their victims' blood using their sharp fangs, killing them, and turning them into vampires themselves.
Well,
we
not
got
necessarily
not
human
necessarily.
blood. It could be cows
This
or
is true.
goats.
Or chickens.
Yeah, it could be anything with blood.
Mm-hmm. Just blood in general.
They go crazy for the
Mhm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm. Some have the ability to morph into a bat or a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Got that classic vampire bat type thing. Their cape, the wings. We got super strength, said to be of pale skin and range in appearance from grotesque to naturally beautiful, depending on the tale.
Sometimes they
Oh.
sparkle in the sun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they do. They do. Sometimes they sparkle in the sun.
They have an affinity for playing baseball in the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, they do often have a hypnotic, sensual effect on their victims as well.
Mhm.
That comes into play later with some stories.
Oh,
In
Zooey
general,
mama.
in general, they're nocturnal. Sunlight weakens their powers and or makes them sparkle, as we've said. They don't have an image in a mirror and they cast no shadows, which often translates into the inability to be photographed or recorded on film.
As you said, most vampires do not have souls, therefore they cannot show up in the reflection of a mirror. I also got that they don't have shadows as well. I don't know if
Mhm.
you said that. But this is not true for all vampires, which came as a shock to myself. Supposedly, the Greek, and I don't know how to say this, but it is different from the one you said. Oh, wait, never mind. I don't know how to say this, but it is the Greek Vrykolakas was capable of both a reflection and a shadow. Also, the sunlight aspect. I got that it usually is not considered vulnerable in the sunlight, which also came as a shock to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a contradiction to what most people believe or know about a vampire.
Yes, but
Huh.
like
Interesting.
we said, it's a worldwide phenomenon,
It is.
so everyone's gonna have different,
Oh,
beliefs. Yeah.
good kind of all around the description of what a vampire is.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and they don't usually die of disease or other normal human afflictions, and because they can heal very quickly.
Sometimes they like to sleep in a
Because
coffin.
yeah, and it's the reason they can't get sick is because they are already sick. They're sick with vampirism.
Mm.
It's a condition.
You know what to read? I read on a website that vampires may be distracted by the scattering of objects such as seeds or grains that they are compelled to count, thereby enabling potential victims to escape. And my mind right now literally was just blown in this exact moment because I just remembered the Count from Sesame Street. Is that what he's from?
Yeah.
Oh
He's
yeah.
literally a vampire who counts things. I literally just made this realization. Oh my gosh. In my notes, I originally took this down because it reminded me of the Rougarou. Because
Mm.
is that the right one? It can only count
Mhm.
up to 13 or something like that.
Yep.
Oh my
Yeah.
Well, it
gosh.
Yeah.
turns out vampires can count up to infinity, and they will
They'll
take
do it.
every chance to try to do it.
They'll
Yep.
do it.
Whoa. Who would have thought that the Count, Sesame Street's greatest, blood-sucking monster, would be so historically accurate?
That's crazy.
Oh man. But yeah, I mean, with that kind of general layout, shall we jump into some of the folklore?
Yeah, so I got a couple ancient legends that I actually pulled from our friend Carlin Betch's book. It's called Monstrous, the Lore, Gore, and Science Behind Your Favorite Monsters. Um, the typical vampire that we're going to be discussing today is mostly like modernized in the kind of way that we just described, but there were characters with characteristics that have appeared as far back as ancient Greece. We've got in ancient Greece, we have the Lamia, the beautiful queen of Libya who was turned into a child devouring monster with a serpent tail. She had the ability to remove her eyes and fed on the blood of young men.
Whoa.
Whoa.
We also
Wow.
have in ancient Babylonia, Lilith is believed to be a demon that feeds on the blood of babies. So, to
Mhm.
protect their children, parents would hang amulets around their baby's cradle.
Is this Lilith related to the not so canonical biblical version of Adam's first wife?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
There's nothing mentioned about that in Carlin's book, but I did look it up to just, confirm and cross-reference sources. But yes, I think it does have ties to that idea.
Yes, and then if I may add a little bit to that as well, uh, supposedly in ancient Sumeria, there was these demons called Lilitu, which were, I guess, offspring of Lilith,
Mm.
and they were vampiric in quality,
Mhm.
hungering for human blood.
Yep,
Ooh wee.
indeed. So yeah, let's get into some of the folklore.
Oh, wait, do you have the oldest vampire tale ever told?
I'm not sure.
It was
What'd it be?
65,000 million years ago when the first
Uh,
caveman, Thug, walked on the wrong side of the tracks and got bit by a vampire dinosaur.
oh, no, that ain't it. It's a little bit after the cavemen.
Oh,
It's
okay.
in the extremely advanced society known as Ancient Egypt. So we have the goddess of war and destroyer of the enemies of Ra, Sekhmet. And she was also called the Eye of Ra. She was the
Oh.
patron of physicians and healers. So apparently, one day, the sun god Ra was mad with the people of Earth for not obeying his rules. So he sent Sekhmet down to Earth in the shape of a lion to, you know, take out some people. And apparently, she really enjoyed it so much, and actually, her bloodlust was quite literal as she was drinking up all the blood of everyone she was killing, and she just wouldn't stop. And so Ra was like, I gotta put an end to this. So he got a bunch of barrels of beer and dyed them blood red with pomegranate juice, which she drank and then passed out for 3 days. And when she woke up, she was cured and humanity was saved. But this is generally considered the oldest vampire legend in the world.
Whoa.
Wow.
That's crazy.
And as far as another world one goes, did you guys hear about the Mananangal?
No.
So this one's actually pretty interesting, and uh, I actually found this one out through Carlin as well. It's actually on one of her posters that I've just recently hung up in my room. It's in the Philippines, and it's this basically looks like a normal chick during the day, but then at night she severs her body in two, leaving her legs on the ground and sprouting giant bat wings and flying around looking for victims.
Oh my.
Uh, and
Whoa.
she prefers sleeping pregnant women. I
Oh.
guess trigger warning. She sucks the heart of the fetus out through the belly button.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
And yeah, but good news. If you rub salt, crushed garlic, or ash on any part of her upper torso there, she'll freak out and die.
Because of a panic attack or because of the effects of those substances?
She's
The
very
effect of
allergic.
the substances. Yeah.
She just can't take it, so
She's just like,
Yeah,
ah,
but that was pretty
somebody
cool.
grabbed my legs. I left them in the forest.
Well, yeah, that's another thing too. Apparently, her legs, which she leaves behind, are quite vulnerable. I I didn't get too deep into this legend. I figured maybe we could cover it down the line because there's actually quite a bit of information on this. But I'm assuming you could just like steal the legs and then she'll never be able to find her legs, you know?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Like, is she like the Iron Giant and the legs just come find her whenever she's ready, or
I
are they
think she
like
has to go
dormant?
back. I think she has to go. She just leaves them there. It says it's the more vulnerable of the two halves, so I'm assuming, they
Maybe,
just kind of
maybe as a defense, she's just like, quick, vampire legs, go, go. And then they can come running back to her real quick, like,
yeah.
and then they jump
Go,
in the air
go.
midway, connect, and then fly away.
Whoa. What if the legs are related to a cryptid? The
Oh
Fresno night
my
crawlers?
gosh! I yelled over you. What did you say? Because I feel like I knew what you were going to say, and so I freaked out, but then I yelled over you, so I didn't actually hear what you said.
Oh, the Fresno Nightcrawlers.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought you were going to say. Mind blown.
Those are just the discarded legs of lady vampires.
Yeah.
It's all coming together now.
What a connection.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. Whoa. All right. Anyways, where are we going now?
Well, let's talk about what one has to go through in order to become a vampire.
Oh, yes. My favorite part.
Fall in love with Robert Pattinson.
That's one route, I
Or
guess.
fall in love with Gary Oldman.
Oh, which version? There's so many Gary Oldmans running around.
Commissioner Gordon from The Dark Knight. No, just kidding. Uh,
So I didn't really get a whole lot on how one becomes a vampire. I just got a small paragraph from Britannica that says a person may become a vampire in a variety of ways, the most common of which is to be bitten by a pre-existing vampire. Other
Hmm.
methods include sorcery, contagion, having a cat jump over someone's corpse, and people believed that babies born with teeth or on Christmas or between Christmas and Epiphany were predisposed to becoming vampires.
Whoa.
Oh, interesting.
Does that mean
Uh,
Jesus was a vampire? Because he was born on Christmas.
Ah, but he wasn't.
I don't.
No?
No, he wasn't.
No.
Uh,
Well, I still like to
uh,
think that Jesus was a vampire. It makes a lot of sense.
Dude.
Is that why
Dude.
he came back from the grave?
Dude.
Yeah.
Because they didn't stake him through the heart, dude. They staked him through his hands. Big mistake.
Oh,
Yeah.
Big mistake.
Oh my
He's just like, hello, everyone. I've risen, and let me tell you, payback's a bitch because I'm hungry.
god. Good Lord. Lord, forgive us.
I got a couple of different ways you can become a vampire. One way is, let's say a vampire is in your village and, it kills a cow. And then your dad, who's the cow farmer, finds this dead cow and is like, woo, I don't have to kill this cow now. I can just make burgers out of it. And then you eat the burgers, you're now going to become a vampire
But wait, how did the vampire who bit the cow become a vampire?
by eating, a cow. It's the typical vampire the cow situation. Uh,
Which came first, the vampire or the tainted cow burger?
so, if that doesn't suit your liking, if you happen to find a vampire and kill it, use its blood to, kind of smear it all over yourself. Smear yourself with vampire blood. It will protect you from vampires as long as you are alive. But when you die, you will become a vampire. So it's kind of a trade-off. You don't have to worry about becoming a vampire while you're alive, but you will become a vampire after you die.
Ooh-wee.
But in other ways, oftentimes, if you die and your corpse is jumped over, if an animal like a dog jumps over your corpse, you could become a vampire then too. In Russian folklore, vampires were once witches, or simply people who rebelled against the Russian Orthodox Church while alive. Yes, those are, I don't know. I feel like more modern day depictions, it drinks your blood, you drink its blood.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. Sometimes you have to get bit 3 times by a
Yeah.
vampire. That's a big one.
I
It's
honestly hadn't heard of most of these. I mean, the typical one being bit by a vampire was the only one that I really knew about.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. Once you get down to the nitty-gritty, there's a lot of weird details in there.
right?
But
You're like, oh man, you're on your deathbed. It's like, oh, I've had a good life, I had a good life. I'm going into the afterlife. It's going to be great. And then as soon as you pass away, your cat comes over and jumps over your body, and you wake up as an undead monster with a thirst for blood.
Oh man. And you're like, I just wanted to rest.
I just wanted to sleep.
What
Oh
have you
no.
done?
Now I gotta go eat a whole cow.
Yep.
So that's how you become a vampire. Uh, is there a way to defeat a vampire? Should he try to want to turn you into a fellow undead?
I think so.
Yes.
So, I mean, we've got your classics. The most popular way to get rid of a vampire who's, trying to attack you is the wooden stake through the heart. We've
Mm-hmm.
also got fire,
Wait. Oh, yeah, fire. Continue, please.
vegetation, and exposure to sunlight. If
Interesting.
you don't have any of those things handy in the moment, you can also repel the vampire by using garlic, running water, which I thought was interesting,
Mm-hmm.
It can't.
or
Yeah, they can't cross it. Yeah.
or Christian implements such as crucifixes and holy water. So I don't think most of those are like not ways to kill. Like I don't think garlic kills a vampire.
It's more like it wards it off, I think.
Yeah, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm part vampire because I really don't like garlic either.
No?
I love garlic. How do you not like garlic, man?
Have you ever had
Oh,
garlic
it's-
bread?
Oh man, garlic bread. That's my weakness. But like, okay, I'll tell you this experience. It traumatized me.
Oh no,
Uh, so I was in the golf team in high school, and
going back.
yeah, just a little bit. And we had this, after the season was over, we had our little party at a pizza place, and the coach ordered garlic pizza and was like, Eli, you want to try some? And I was like, yes, I like to try new things. And it was probably the worst pizza I've ever had in my life.
So you're
And my
scarred.
breath smelled like garlic for like 2 to 3 days.
I
What
get that.
was it? Just cheese, pizza, with garlic on it?
Yes, that's exactly what it
What?
was.
What a
Yeah,
that,
they were maniacs, dude.
that's
But it was
Absolute
just
kinda
bad
crazy.
quality.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Alex?
Oh, I just that's kind of crazy because it's just like, all right, well, let's take a cheese pizza, please, and then just cut up some garlic on it. Well, would you like any pepperoni or some mushrooms to kind of go well with that? No, 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 just the garlic, just
Hey man,
Yeah.
the raw garlic on it.
it's basically garlic
nothing
bread.
else.
Dude, you realize that that's basically just dipping garlic bread into marinara sauce. If you have a
But
pizza with
it's
sauce, cheese, and
It's
garlic,
not
you're basically eating garlic
it's not
bread
the
with
same.
it is
marinara.
not the
But no,
same.
I
Not the
totally
same.
get what you're saying.
That's like being like, oh, you know what? I don't want a pizza. I'll take a calzone, please. Technically, they might be the same thing, but it's the intention and how you make it.
Oh, where have we gone? I'm just saying that the idea is not bad. The sentiment is there. You just must have had a bad quality pizza at this place because I don't know how you messed that up. But
It was
anyways,
just cheese and garlic.
cheese and garlic is delicious.
But on a pizza, that's just crazy talk. We're talking about pizza. We're talking about one of the
Okay,
most holy,
okay.
sacred foods of all time.
The point is, my golf coach is not gonna get bit by a vampire anytime soon.
Yeah. There's also another way that you can avoid being attacked by a vampire, which comes in handy during the pandemic because vampires can only enter a home if they've been invited. So, I mean, being secluded for 6 months in your home, not hanging out with people, being socially distant is a great way to make sure that you
But
don't come in contact
they,
with a vampire.
it's not gonna get you sick. Well, unless you count vampirism as a
I'm not.
disease.
We cannot invite people into our home who may be vampires. So no vampires will be in our home to bite us and turn us into vampires. The vampires aren't going to give us COVID. They're not going to
No,
bite us. You
no,
get what
that's
I'm
what I'm
saying?
saying. You should allow them in.
I don't want to be a vampire.
Why not? Immortality? All you gotta do
No,
is kill
thank you. Listen,
kill
if
people a
anybody
little bit.
if anybody ever offers me the opportunity to be immortal, it's a hard pass for me, buddy. I don't want that.
Why not?
Because
You get to go around sucking people's blood all day, all
I want
night.
rest.
You know,
I want to sleep.
kinda-
I want to be just done. When my time is up,
you just sleep
I'm
during the
done.
day. You get to have a castle all to yourself if you play your cards right.
If
You
you play
know.
your cards right. Gotta get a sugar
Yeah.
daddy vampire to get me that castle.
Yeah, man. Or, just kill the guy who owns the castle as a vampire. Boom. He's not gonna stop you. He's dead.
Oh
You
my
know.
goodness.
Uh, but I know what we're all thinking here. This is all entirely complicated. How to repel. What if you don't want to eat, cheese garlic pizza every week? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of, sacrifice. And you're like, maybe the steak would be the simplest option, but newsflash, it is not. You have to use very specific wood. I don't know if you guys got this, but so in Russia, if you live in Russia or in the Baltic states, you would have to use ashwood stakes. Stakes made from the ash trees. If you live in Serbia, you have to use hawthorn trees. And if you live in Silesia, you have to use oak. And then I guess the most popular steak, aspen trees. Do you know why? Can we venture to guess here?
Um,
Aspen trees grow in snowy climates, so the ice reinforces the wood.
Nay, nay. We're going back to our boy Jesus Christ. Uh,
Superstar.
well, it was believed that Christ's cross was made out of aspen. So, by using the same kind of wood as a stake will help kill the
I see.
vampire. Yes. Oh, yes. And you might be wondering, where should I stab this vampire? This is also a complex question as well. Uh, so if you live in Russia and northern Germany, you're gonna stab it right through the mouth. And if you live in northeastern Serbia, you're gonna stab them right through the stomach. And if you don't live in those places, you're just gonna cut its head off, and then bury the head beneath the feet or underneath the buttocks, away from the body.
So he can crop dust himself for all eternity.
Ew.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that just depending on where you live, you got to hunt down a certain kind of wood to
Yeah,
stake
I know, right?
these monsters. It's just like, all right, well, unfortunately, Fortunately, there was a forest fire, and the entire, forest is burned down, so we're out of that wood. You're like, oh crap! All right, well, I guess I'll have to wait 10 to 15 years for new trees to sprout before we can stab this vampire. Or do you have to change his mailing address to a different region so you can use that wood?
All right.
So
Okay.
a long time ago, like in the Middle Ages and stuff, before people really understood how certain diseases spread, they sometimes imagined vampires were behind the unseen forces slowly ravaging their communities. So basically, disease meant vampires. Um, I have a quote from Mark Collins Jenkins, who wrote the book Vampire Forensics, and he said, "The one constant in the evolution of vampire legend has been its close association with disease." So trying to kill vampires or prevent them from feeding was a way for people to feel as though they had some control over disease because they thought the two were related. Because of this, in the Middle Ages, vampire scares tended to coincide with outbreaks of the plague, because the disease often left bleeding mouth lesions on its victims, which looked like a sign of vampirism. Is it vampirism or vampirism?
Oh,
Whatever you want.
All
yeah.
right. Whatever comes out of my mouth will be what it is. So it wasn't uncommon for anyone with an unfamiliar physical or emotional illness to be labeled as a vampire. Many researchers have pointed to porphyria. I've tried saying this so many times and it still comes out stumbled. But it's a blood disorder that can cause severe blisters on skin that's exposed to sunlight. So that kind of ties into the whole vampires are vulnerable in the sun idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some symptoms of this disease can also be temporarily relieved by ingesting blood. Other diseases blamed for promoting the vampire myth included rabies, caused general sensitivities that could lead to repulsion by light or garlic, tuberculosis, which causes wasting, and pellagra, which is a disease that thins the skin. So if anybody had any sort of these diseases, they were looked at as being a vampire. Um, so that's kind of the idea of like living vampires back in the Middle Ages. But they also believed that vampires could as raise from the grave and wreak havoc. So scholars suspect that the modern conception of vampires evolved from various traditional beliefs that were held throughout Europe. These beliefs centered around the fear that the dead, once buried, could still harm the living. So these legends arose from a misunderstanding again of how bodies decompose. So we had misinformation about diseases and have, I guess not misinformation, but lack of information about
Mhm.
how bodies decompose. Uh, you can also read about some in Carlin's book again. I used her vampire chapter for a good portion of my research, but this can also be found on almost like any article you read about vampires. So as a corpse's skin shrinks, its teeth and fingernails can appear to have grown longer, because that skin is coming back.
Mhm.
Uh, and as internal organs break down, there's this thing called purge fluid, which is dark and can leak out of the nose and the mouth. So people unfamiliar with this process would interpret this fluid as being blood and suspect that the corpse had been drinking it from the living. Also, possibly contributing to the vampire belief was the this one's interesting, the early pronouncement of death for people who were not actually dead yet. So again, because of the constraints of medical diagnosis in this time, people who were very ill or sometimes even very drunk and in a coma or in shock were thought to be dead, and later they miraculously recovered, but sometimes it was too late to prevent their burial, so they literally would, raise from the dead. Um,
That-
I don't
uh,
know. Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, may I just add, because you mentioned, Jasmine, that sometimes people would be pronounced dead before their time, actually, and they get buried alive.
mhm.
This was so predominant in certain times that they would, when they buried someone, they would put a hole through the coffin with a string attached to a little bell by the
Yeah.
tombstone. And so that way, if anyone woke up and be like, "Oh, I'm not dead yet. Don't bury me." Ring,
Dude,
ring,
can
ring,
you
ring, ring.
Yeah.
imagine?
Oh, we got another one. Uh-oh, looks like Mrs. Johansson isn't dead yet.
Um, Now my question though, this is kind of like a never-ending cycle. Like I don't really know where the cycle starts because I don't know why people were digging up graves in the first place and discovering these things about the corpses, having,
And that's
purge
where
fluid
I
on their
take my
face.
side.
All right, go ahead.
Uh, because I don't know. Like you said, why are normal people don't dig up other people when they're dead, especially not their family members, to chop off their heads and burn their bodies and cast their ashes out over the river. That's not like a normal person thing to do, you
Right.
Well,
know?
I mean, maybe in your family.
Maybe for Alex, I don't know.
It's just like, hey, what are you guys doing in that coffin? You guys got any cookies in there?
Yeah. Look at this. We're like 120 episodes in, and I'm still learning new things about my co-hosts. Um, uh, but yeah, I don't know. To me, I don't know. We'll get into it as we go on, specifically with some cases. But I did have a question for you, and Jasmine, and I'm not
Yes.
sure if you're gonna have the answer for this.
Okay.
Uh, Obviously, because I don't expect you to be an expert. But do you happen to know how long? You mentioned the non-decomposing parts. Uh, when they dig them up, there's the nails obviously can keep growing after death. Sometimes the facial hair keeps
Mhm.
growing after death. Do you know how
Well,
long that
again,
lasts?
it's not growing. It appears to be growing because the skin is shrinking backwards.
Sure. Do you know how long that lasts?
I don't. No. Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Because I have some pretty interesting things. We'll get there when we start
Mhm.
talking about sightings.
I
You'll,
think I
yeah.
know what you're alluding to. Yeah.
Yes. But where are we at then? Oh,
I think we're gonna talk about burial techniques because there's this whole okay, sick people appear to be vampires when they're alive. We have other ways of identifying vampires, or we think people are vampires. Whatever. We also have this idea of vampires, you know, getting out of their coffins every night and going out for a late night stroll and sucking on the necks of whoever they pass by. So when a suspected vampire did pass away, people took precautions to make sure that they couldn't rise from the grave again. So when a suspected vampire died, their bodies were often disinterred to search for signs of vampirism. So it's like, oh, we thought this person was a vampire. So now they're dead. So now let's dig them up and see if they really were a vampire. And
kind of. It's usually because I don't know. Sorry to cut you off, but
it's okay. This practice likely began in Eastern Europe, spreading to Western countries, including France and England in the 1700s, and then to rural New England, where vampire panics were common up through the late 1800s, particularly in Rhode Island. So, when archaeologists discover a burial containing skeletons treated as if they were dangerous or could possibly rise from the dead, they called them deviant burials. And this is where we find some weird stuff. In some cases, you can find a stake that had been thrust through a corpse's heart post mortem to make sure that they stay dead.
Stay dead.
Other accounts describe the decapitation and burning of the corpses of suspected vampires well into the 19th century. In some cultures, the dead were buried face down to prevent them from
Mhm.
finding their way out of their graves. Which, I mean, I guess. Um, here's some
Because
specific
well,
examples. Go
when
ahead.
you're dead, you can't tell up from down. You know, you can't do that anymore.
You
You're dead.
just I mean, I was gonna say you just gotta spit, but if you're undead, do you have bodily fluids? Like, can you spit?
You use some
That's
of
why you
that.
gotta suck blood.
I don't
Well, you
know.
use some of that decomposition fluid in your stomach to spit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's
Well,
some
how are you
specific.
gonna see? You're underground in a coffin.
You can feel it. If you spit and it ends up in your eye, you're upside down.
But how you can't feel anything. You're dead.
I don't know, man. There's a lot of details we have to explore.
Hey, man, girls can't break my heart when I'm dead, dude. That's another reason why I want to be a vampire.
But they
Oh,
could, but they
Eli.
can stake it for you.
Oh, buddy.
No.
Um.
All right, let's do it.
So some specific examples of these burial techniques that have been found. We've got 2009 in Drosko, Poland. Skeletons were found with iron sickles across their necks because in folklore, iron was believed to keep vampires down.
Hmm.
In the 1990s, 14 skeletons were found in the Czech Republic with large boulders placed across their chest. These victims were all believed to have died in the 12th or 13th century, probably from the plague epidemic. Uh, in 2006, archaeologists unearthed a 16th century skull in Venice, Italy, that had been buried among plague victims with a brick in its mouth. The brick was likely a burial tactic to prevent strega, which are Italian vampires or witches, from leaving the grave to eat people. Uh, yeah, and then not all vampires were thought to physically leave their grave. In northern Germany, there were these things called after devourers, which have an official name that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, but it starts with an N. It's Nachzehrer. But these after devourers stayed in the ground, chewing on their burial shrouds. And again, this belief likely has to do with the purge fluid I mentioned earlier because it could cause the shroud to like tear or disintegrate, all those, bodily acids and whatnot. So this would
Hmm.
create the illusion that the corpse had been chewing on its shroud. And these were the people, undead vampires, that were thought to cause trouble above ground from the grave. So, like, there was this
Oh
belief
yes.
that that from the grave they could make other people sick or curse other people. There was a 1679 tract called On the Chewing Dead, where a Protestant theologian accused these after devourers of harming their surviving family members through occult processes. He wrote that people could stop them by exhuming the body and stuffing its mouth with soil and maybe a stone and a coin for good measure, because without the ability to chew, the corpse would die of starvation. And honestly, as I've been reading a lot about this stuff, this sounds like some zombie stuff to me. Like, zombies and vampires are tending to sound a little bit similar to me.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting because you look back at some of these stories, and they say, oh, uh, the dead are rising from their coffins, they're sucking blood, they're causing disease. And when I was looking at the research, there's a lot of crossover to where sometimes it's like, oh, in these old folklores, a werewolf and a vampire are essentially the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're like, well, when a werewolf dies, it just becomes a vampire.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say, if you want to do like an umbrella blanket, you could say the undead ghoul, like slash ghouls, of just like an undead creature that causes havoc. And then all the subcategories. Well, you got your zombies, usually spread by a bite, but it's more of like a virus. Whereas vampires, you become a dead, mindless zombie. Whereas vampires sometimes retain their senses. They're aware of what they are. Sometimes they're a little more elegant, a little fancy. They have castles, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So but it is interesting. There is this big crossover where it's just like, oh, sometimes vampires, they turn hairy in the full moon and they run around howling.
Yeah, vampires are pretty OP, man. They have a lot of powers.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you got this for an anti-burial, anti-vampire burial. Sometimes corpses were buried with sharp objects because it was believed, when they gorged themselves with blood, they would bloat up. And then when they
You poke them
bloated,
like a balloon.
yeah, exactly, they would deflate. And then, that would take care of your vampire problem. In fact, in Bulgaria, they found over 100 skeletons with metal objects such as plow bits buried into people's chests, probably as a result of this belief.
Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, that is a thing that happens to dead bodies. They bloat up. So that could
Mhm.
probably be another thing that happened when they would like open the graves and see that they were bloated and make it
Mhm.
look like they were growing or, gaining weight or something like that.
Yeah, because
Yep.
the thought, one of the things I found in my research is they're like, oh, vampires in their most simplistic folklore is they rise from the grave, they suck the blood, and they get so, like you said, gorged and bloated, and then they just go back in their coffin and it just kind of seeps out. So you dig up somebody and the body's bloated. There's stuff leaking out their mouth and their nose, and you're like, whoa, that guy gained 20 pounds in the afterlife.
Yeah. I got that the Romani people, I'm assuming these are the people from Romania, but Romanian. No, I don't know where the Romani people are from, but they drove steel or iron needles into corpses' hearts and then placed steel in their mouth, over their eyes, ears, and in between the fingers at the time of burial, and just for extra savageness, would drive stakes through their legs.
Oh.
You're staying dead. Uh, in the
Can't take your
Balkans,
legs off and fly away now.
I guess not. Uh, in the Balkans, the most common way to kill a vampire was to shoot it or to drown it, which I feel like, most people would die from that. But
I was gonna say, woohoo!
uh,
A vampire's greatest weakness, being drowned, just like every other creature on Earth.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. So in Romania, they used to place garlic in the mouth and then shoot the body through the coffin. Uh, Yeah, this was done through the 19th century, so fairly recent, actually. Um, Sometimes the complete incineration of the body is required. I mean, I feel like that's pretty fair.
Wow.
And then the most strange one that I got was that in the Saxon regions of Germany, they would place a lemon in the mouth of the presumed vampire.
Good way to stop them.
Because
The zest is too real.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know. I have no idea. I
All
couldn't
right,
find a
you
reason behind
undead bloodsucker. Have some citrus.
it. Maybe they're just looking out for the vampire. If you're living on, a diet of just pure blood, it's very possible to get scurvy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you need some of those, you need citrus.
When life gives you vampires, give them lemons.
But that is, Alex, did you have anything as far as, anti-vampire burial?
Let's see, because I think we mentioned a lot of it. Just when someone passed away, just you know, cut their head off or stake them and then bury them in the ground. I was going to say this is two completely unrelated things, but I was thinking, first of all, Jasmine mentioned these things called deviant burials, which just sounds like a really cool band name. Because tonight we got Cannibal Corpse, Mastodon, and Deviant Burials. And second of all, you were mentioning this is going back to, well, why would someone dig up a dead person, just out of the blue? There is, I believe, a village somewhere. I want to say maybe Indonesia or somewhere, to where every year the family members go into the graveyard and they dig up their dead relatives.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've seen pictures of that.
And then they give them new clothes and they rebury them.
Yep, I've seen that.
Mm-hmm. And you'll have, and then like the picture to where it's just like 3 or 4 people and they're all smiling, having a good old time, and there's just the mummified corpse of grandma next to them.
Oh.
It's just like, well, so how you doing? How's the afterlife? We got you some new clothes, a nice new dress. Well, we'll see you next year. Then they bury him back in the ground.
Huh.
Yeah, so that's what I just was thinking of that. Where it's just like, oh yeah, there's somewhere where they're just like, all right, well, what have you been doing in the year? Hardly working because you're a dead corpse?
Dude, another benefit of being a vampire, I don't have to work and I don't have to pay taxes. I live in a coffin. Like,
vampires commit tax fraud.
I guess, but who pays for the land that your coffin's on or in?
That's your Renfield's
it would have
job.
been paid for. It would have been paid for. Everyone thought I died, so they paid for my burial. Then, I get to crawl out at night, and then if they, want to come check it out, because they're like, "Whoa, Eli's been walking around, sucking people's blood." Psych, I'm in there. No, I'm not. I was in there the whole time. I'll tell them that to their face.
Sir, please, I've been dead this whole time.
Could you imagine? All right. Where does that take us to?
Well, next on the list, I think we have some history, which includes some sightings, some specific sightings and events that take place.
Oh, yes. So I think Alex has the same sightings as I do, at least for a little bit.
I believe so, yeah.
So I'm going to Eastern Prussia in the 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
And these are probably the most well-documented cases of vampire activity, as far as I know. Like, seriously, they are well documented by the Austrian government. It's like official documents here.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, so basically, I think, let's see. These stories take place in Serbia, but a lot of Serbia's got a pretty wild history. They were taken over by the Turks, the Ottoman Turks specifically, for I think 500 years they were under the rule of the Ottoman Turks. Not the entirety of Serbia, but a lot of it. And keep in mind, this will come up in this story. So I'm going to share the shorter one first. So 1721, we have a man named Peter, bear with me here, Plagajowicz. And he died at the age of 62. And according to the story, according to the report, I should say, he came back several times after his death asking his son for food. And when his son finally refused the request for food, he was found dead the next day.
Whoa.
Yes. My bad. I forgot to mention the location. This was Kisilova, the village. And so the residents demanded that their leader, Frombald, and the local priests come along with them to exhume the body of Peter to check his body for vampiric, symptoms. And at first, Frombald was like, "You guys got to talk to the authorities in Belgrade first because I don't really want to deal with this." And they were like, "By the time we ask them, our entire village is going to be killed by vampires. So we're just going to leave." And then he's like, "All right, fine. Don't leave. Let's dig up this guy's grave." And they dug it up, and to their shock, they found the body undecomposed. The nails are longer. Obviously, this is, all explainable. Nails are longer, beard is longer. And supposedly he had new skin, the old being peeled away. I think you mentioned something about the skin falling off, right, Jasmine?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so there you go. Blood, and there was blood at his mouth. And so
Mhm.
they staked him through the heart, causing more blood to come out of the ears and the mouth, and then they burned the body.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, However, what makes it strange, there was a death involved, but I mean, it's not even as weird as the next one that's coming up. I don't know. Alex, did you have anything to add to that one or no?
Uh, let's see. I don't know if you mentioned it, but where I got it said that he went to his son, asked for food, and his son refused, and so he killed his son in response.
Yeah.
Did you mention that?
I said that his son was found dead the next day.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they said that he'd like been brutally murdered.
Yeah,
Uh,
pretty
so
savage.
I think that's kind of all the big details of that wild resurrection story.
Yes. So the next one occurred just a few years later in a village called Medwegna or Medwegna. Not sure how you pronounce that, but it is the story of Arnold Paul. That's Paole. He was a Serbian soldier, and he had moved to this town out of Turkish controlled Serbia. As I mentioned earlier, the Ottomans were controlling a portion of Serbia. He moved out of there and moved to this town, just kind of being a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
He mentioned a couple of times when he was alive that he had been attacked by a vampire in a location called Gosawa, which a lot of people, it doesn't exist, basically, this place, but a lot of people think he might have been talking about modern day Kosovo, but we're not entirely sure. Arnold claimed that even though he had been attacked by a vampire, that he cured himself by eating soil from the vampire's grave and smearing himself with its blood. And y'all remember what I said about the smearing of the blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one day in 1725, he fell from his hay wagon and broke his neck. Within 20 to 30 days after his death, 4 people complained that they had been plagued by him. And all 4 of those people died within days of complaining about that. And let's see. I'm going to read this quote here. So 10 days after those people had died, and 40 days after Arnold's death, the villagers who had supposedly witnessed such things before exhumed his grave, and they saw his corpse was undecomposed and with all the indications of being a vampire. They say that his veins were full of blood, and that fresh blood flowed from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, and that his shirt and the coffin were completely covered in blood, and that, you
Yikes.
know, uh, his nails had fallen off and new ones had grown on both his hands and feet. Uh, like I mentioned earlier, the skin had fallen off and a new layer had grown. His body was red. His hair, nails, and beard had all grown, and so they concluded that he was a vampire. They drove a stake through his heart.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets me. Supposedly, he screamed once they
Oh,
stabbed him through the heart.
Mm-hmm.
oh
Yeah.
yeah.
And
I read something about that.
yeah, really?
Yeah.
It's are they gonna say that it's air being released from the body or something?
I'm not sure. Let me see if I can find where I read it at. Okay, this is a quote from Carlin's book. It says,
Mm,
Driving a stake through the chest doesn't help matters. What happens when a balloon suddenly lets out air?" So this is like related to like bloating type thing. It
Mm.
kind of makes a
yeah.
shrieking noise, right? You can imagine how that must have freaked medieval people out, and that's not the only strange noise dead bodies can make. And then she talks about how the dead can also groan. When the abdominal wall bursts, it makes a noise that sounds like a pig snacking on garbage.
Mm. And then they burned his body afterwards.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that
Uh,
it says that he screams, because my sources were like, oh, they staked a stake through his heart, whereby he gave an audible groan and bled copiously. So it just sounds like they
no,
stabbed him and he went like, ugh.
no, it says he screamed.
Yeah,
A
that's
frightful
way
shriek, I
scarier.
guess.
Way
Yeah.
scarier.
And apparently they did the same thing to the four victims,
Mm.
the presumed victims, and cut off their heads and burned their bodies just to make sure. But this is the one that really gets weird because in the same town, only 5 years later, there was a second outbreak of vampirism here.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the winter of 1731, and 10 people had died in just a few weeks. No previous conditions, just 3 days. They got, it says they languished and then they died. And according to some sources, it's, 13. Other sources say it's 17 people died by December 13th of 1731. The reason why there's two conflicting sources is because the Austrian government actually sent two surgeons to go investigate this case. There's actually 5 people that went to go investigate this, sent by the Austrian government. So I'm not entirely sure why there's a disparity there, but somewhere between the range of 13 to 17 people died, and I mean everything from really elderly people to a 15-day-year-old baby,
Mm-hmm.
or a 15-day-old baby had died. So it's definitely pretty strange. And like I said, none of them were suffering from, previous conditions, of course, that we know about.
Mm-hmm.
So the villagers blamed 2 women, Milica and Stana, and they were believed to have started it, and they had died just shortly before this. Both had come over from Ottoman-controlled areas. Again, they're coming from a Turkish-controlled area of Serbia. I feel like that has something to do with it. They're technically outsiders. And, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit once we get to, Vlad the Impaler. But the Turks had they would capture people very young and raise them as their own, teaching them
Mm-hmm.
their ways. And even if they still felt kinship to their native Serbians or whoever they were with, I'm sure they would still be viewed as outsiders because they weren't raised Serbian, they were raised Turkish. And I'm not saying that I know for a fact that that's what happened to to Arnold or to these 2 women, but I think it's a possibility for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So Milica once mentioned when she was alive that she ate a sheep that had been bitten by a vampire. And Stana said that she had smeared herself with the blood of a vampire, as vampires were very active where she was in the Ottoman controlled part of Serbia. So the Austrian military was called in once all these people started dying, and they exhumed the bodies. And so the leader of the investigation there was Schnezer. And at first, he blamed it on malnutrition, which I feel like is a pretty good guess, especially in a rural area. Maybe, malnutrition was a much bigger issue, I feel like, back then than it is now. Uh, but the villagers again threatened to leave if they did not exhume the bodies because they were that worried about being killed by vampires. So he granted access to exhume the bodies. And to his surprise, the bodies were not decomposed. Again, they had blood in their mouth. And this is where it gets weird. Because, like I said, there were 2 surgeons on the scene. And the people who had died, or, supposed victims of the vampires, were terribly decomposed, while the vampires were not decomposed.
Mm.
In fact, one of them, Milica, and I guess you could say this is due to bloating or whatnot, but she had actually gained weight after she died, which is really, I don't know, gets me pretty, kind of freaks me out, dude. I don't know. I was like, whoa. And so they had these surgeons study the bodies. Skin and nails had fallen off, new ones had grown. They cut the heads off the vampire bodies and burned the other bodies. And there was actually a couple of people. So out of the 40 people who died in the whole course of the events, 17 people had vampiric symptoms, and the other people did not. And I find that very strange. But the report is dated as January 26, 1732, signed by the 5 officers involved. I just think it's weird. I don't know. I guess everyone's body decomposes differently, but what I'm getting is that, this is obviously way before, like if you were to dig up a grave now in modern day United States, they put so many preservatives and things in the bodies nowadays. They really do, to find a non-decomposed body several weeks after the fact is probably not that rare in modern day. But this is, early 1700s. To exhume a body several weeks after it had been buried and find that it's not decomposed, I think is very weird, very strange.
Yeah.
Pretty wild, huh?
Yeah.
And you know what's crazy too is because it's funny as you were telling the story, because I was looking at my sources and my notes as we are going along, and they only mentioned Stana as the one being dissected.
Oh, really?
They don't mention the other girl. But
Milica.
Milica, yes,
Yeah.
they don't. There's no mention of her in this. But what's funny is they the article I found, they focused on one of the surgeons. I think it's because he has the craziest name ever.
What is it?
So there's vampires in a medieval 17th century village, and you got to send for one man. You send for Dr. Johannes Flukinga, and it's
Yeah.
FLU with 2 umlauts, CKINGER. And all I will say is, gosh, what a missed opportunity for Dracula to nemesis not be Van Helsing, but Dr. Flukinga.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if I said which of the 2 girls gained weight after she died, but it was Milica, supposedly. But yes, oh yeah, and in the official report, they say that the bodies are suffering from a vampiric disease. So I don't know. There's official Austrian documents that confirm the existence of vampires.
Very interesting.
Yes, but where does that? I mean,
does that take us to science?
Well, I got a story.
Right.
I got a story about a girl named Mercy Brown.
Oh wait, I have one more before that. May I share?
Yes.
It is known as the Vampire of Berwick, and this occurred in the 12th century, which I guess predates the other story I just told, the Serbian vampires. And this is real quick, but in Berwick, England, a wealthy man died, and shortly after his death, they reported seeing him around town, at night. And so the townsfolk exhumed his body and burned it. But after the fact, a plague spread, and they blamed it on the vampire.
Yeah, the plague was all the vampire's fault. That's what we're finding.
Well, multiple plagues. It seems like a lot of
Yeah.
plagues were
Mm-hmm.
blamed on vampires, which is interesting. All right, but Mercy Brown.
Yeah, so Mercy Brown, she was 19 years old. She died of tuberculosis in 1892. She lived in Rhode Island, actually, and was the daughter of a farmer named George Brown. So, from what I understand when I read about her, is that her mother and her sister had already died previous to her, and her brother Edwin was sick. Concerned neighbors were worried that one of the recently deceased Brown women might be harming Edwin from the grave. So the community used Mercy as the scapegoat to explain. This is where I get a little bit confused because it says they used her as a scapegoat to explain their deaths, but she died after them, after her sister and her mom. I don't know. Uh, but basically, it was this whole idea of deaths being blamed on the undead, cursing people from the grave, things like that. So they dug her up. They did the whole exhume the body, and her body wasn't displaying any decomposition or decay either. But
Mm.
some people say this is because her body was placed in an above ground vault during a New England winter. So it was kept really cold.
Mm.
Um,
Right.
but they did find blood in her mouth uh, and her heart, apparently. And so they took this to be a sign of vampirism, the usual. So they did the typical things. They cut out her heart, they burned it, and they mixed the ashes into a potion for Edwin to drink. And this potion was meant to protect him and heal him, but it actually killed him. At least that's what we think now, because he did die a few months later. So I don't know. I feel like if he
Yeah.
would have drank that, he would have died sooner than a few months later. But who really knows?
I don't know. Well, you
It
said
couldn't have helped.
Yeah.
she died from tuberculosis, right?
Yeah.
I feel doesn't tuberculosis take a little while too?
Maybe. I wouldn't
I
know.
don't know. I'm gonna look it up real quick, but continue.
Um. That's really all there is for Mercy's story, but I do just have some information that was provided related to her story and kind of all of these stories that we've told about bodies being exhumed. So, folklorist and Food for the Dead author Michael Bell estimates that there are 60 known examples of anti vampire rituals in the 18th and 19th century New England, and several others elsewhere in the country. So, these rituals were most common in eastern Connecticut and Rhode Island, says Brian Carroll, a history professor at Central Washington University. And there's kind of two beliefs of where these rituals came from. I mean, we've talked about them quite a bit, but these are just kind of two opinions about where they originated from. So Carroll believes that these anti-vampire rituals were introduced as a medical procedure at the time of the American Revolution by German doctors, which he thinks the New England vampires were based on the German after devourers that we mentioned earlier. So, unlike blood sucking Romanian vampires, New England vampires stayed in their grave, harming the living through sympathetic magic from afar. Bell, however, believes that anti-vampire practices in New England came from many places and that the suspected New England vampires were actually more akin to Romanian vampires than the after devourers. Like Romanians, New Englanders were looking for liquid blood in the vital organs, not evidence of shroud chewing. He says the anti-vampire remedy of cutting the heart out, burning it to ashes, and giving the ashes to the sick person or sick people was also practiced in Romania. So whoever's right, both of these beliefs were driven by the same social concerns as those before them, which was a fear of disease and a desire to contain it.
Mm. Just real quick though, tuberculosis, if left untreated, can take 5 years to kill you.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's very possible. It's very possible that that drink killed him.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
I
mean,
didn't know that.
drinking a cocktail of burned up bodies. Seems to be not the best medical when although I guess when your alternatives is what they just stick leeches on you.
Where are we at? Yeah.
If
Oh, the Highgate vampire.
Yeah, so there was this thing that happened in London's Highgate Cemetery. Before I tell that story though, there's kind of like a chain of events that kind of leads up to this because what happens at Highgate Cemetery is not the same thing as what we've been talking about up until this point. So the modern incarnation of vampire myth seems to have stemmed largely from the Gothic European literature of the 18th and 19th centuries about the
Oh
time
yes.
vampire hysteria was peaking in Europe during the vampire panic. And guys, feel free to jump in if I mention any of these things that you have more details on. During the vampire panic in New England, vampires were finding a new role in European books like The Vampire from 1819, Carmilla 71-72, and Dracula from 1897, as well as vampire themed plays. Uh, and then they appeared in poetry, and it just kind of continues and evolves into something new. But the panics died down in the 20th century as these fictional monsters replaced the old folk beliefs and as medical knowledge improved. Uh, but in the 1960s, there was this resurgence because the president of the British Occult Society said that a vampire was causing people to see strange things in London's Highgate Cemetery. So newspapers had already covered reports of a tall figure with burning eyes and other spectral sights floating in the cemetery. So journalists uh, picked up the theory, Manchester's theory. So this guy was Sean Manchester. They picked up his theory that these sightings were the work of an Eastern European vampire. They even embellished his claims a bit, calling the figure a king vampire or writing that the vampire had practiced black magic in Romania before traveling to London in his coffin. I don't know how you travel in a coffin, but uh, so in 1970, Manchester told a TV news team that he planned to exorcise the vampire on Friday the 13th. So
Oh.
on that on that night, hundreds of young people turned up to the cemetery to watch him perform an exorcism, which he ended up not doing. So this panic wasn't really a case of vampires being scapegoated for disease, but rather just a media sensation and an instance of what people call legend tripping, which is when young people go to a supposedly haunted place to test their bravery. So, although vampires by the 20th century largely became creatures of fantasy, urban myths about vampires continued to persist. And as late as the early 20th century, some villages in Bulgaria still practiced the corpse impaling method.
Oh. Well, going back to the Highgate vampire. Uh, uh, so as you mentioned, Jasmine, the British Psychic and Occult Society was involved, and their president, David Farrant, got involved as well. And he was actually arrested in the 1960s. Uh, he went to the cemetery to investigate, and so they arrested him and tried to press him with charges that he was trying to dig up a grave and kill a vampire. I don't think it went well, meaning that he was not, charged with any sort of crimes, but they tried to nail him on that 3 times. And of course, the media, like you mentioned, you actually described it very well. The media was like, they think there's a vampire there. And he's like, no, I don't. I'm just trying to investigate. And I don't know if you got any of the sightings about that.
Mm-mm.
So some of the Highgate Cemetery. Well, there's like a number of crazy things that happen in that cemetery. There's like quite a bit of occult activity. There's been sightings as recent as 2007 at this cemetery, and I'm not saying it's a
Whoa.
vampire. Yeah, but there's like something weird going on for sure. But yeah, and then in 1997, David Farrant created the Highgate Vampire Society to collect oral history and written data on the Highgate vampire. So one of the sightings he collected was in 1971. A young girl claimed she was attacked in the lane next to the cemetery. She was hurled to the ground by a tall black figure with a, quote, deathly white face. And she actually had scrapes on her arms and legs from being thrown on the ground. And a car just so happened to be driving by, and when the headlights of the car hit it, it just vanished. And she saw it, the young girl who had been thrown to the ground, and so did the driver. They both saw it vanish into thin air. And when, the driver took her to the police station and she made an actual police report of it. And when the police showed up to investigate the area where it had occurred, uh, on either side of the road were 4-meter tall walls. And so let me do this quick little 4 meters 2 feet. So I know what it is. But yeah, basically 13-foot walls on either side. So pretty high to jump unless you're spring-heeled Jack. Yeah, I don't know. That one's pretty weird. Apparently, in April 1922, a clerk was grabbed by an entity in a lane next to the cemetery. And whatever this entity was pierced his neck and drew blood. He fainted and fell down. He was found and carried to the hospital, and the surgeons told him that he had been stabbed with a tubular object, and he said that there wasn't anyone nearby when he was walking through. I don't know. That's pretty
Whoa.
weird to me.
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
I don't know. Not saying there's a vampire there, but I don't know. I feel like just the amount of like ghost stories too that come out of that cemetery, and the known occult activity that occurs there. I just find it strange.
Oh yeah,
I feel like
it
there's
sounds
something
like
going on.
a vampire is the least of their worries with all that other stuff running around.
Yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. But yes, so that brings us to real vampires, right? Enough with all the legends and the folklore. Let's get down to the real stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And when we say real vampires, we are talking about people who do kind of identify themselves as vampires because they drink small amounts of blood in an effort to stay healthy, as well as some other practices. But that's kind of like just like a one sentence description of these people who do exist right now in the United States.
Yes. 5,000 people in the United States identify as vampires. Did you say that?
Ooh.
No, I didn't give a number. I just said that they exist. They exist all around the world, but there is a community of them in the United States as well.
Oh, yes. And specifically, New Orleans, baby.
Oh,
That
where else
wasn't a
but the
joke. I don't know
Big
why.
Easy?
Yes. So the New Orleans Vampire Association, I believe there's about 50 members. They drink blood in order to sustain themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as bad as vampire as you get.
Is it in the human blood?
It is, and it's important to note that the blood they drink does come from willing donors, and they conduct their feedings in private.
Is it locally sourced, grass-fed, free-range humans, I hope?
Free
I
range
don't
here.
know.
Yeah. So, according to a study conducted by John Edgar Browning, the symptoms of vampirism begin around puberty. And so, I'm going to quote his article here. When those who later become reliant on ingesting blood find themselves physically drained for no discernible reason, they usually discover accidentally that blood offers a remedy. They might bite their lip, for instance, and realize that swallowing the metallic liquid between their teeth gives them an instant burst of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know, it's kind of weird, but apparently one lady in the UK who claims she is a vampire and does her, feeding on blood, uh, decided to go 4 months without feeding. She was like, I'm done with this. I'm not gonna eat. And she ended up in the emergency room with a low
Mm.
heart rate, losing, like she was going in and out of consciousness, had a massive migraine. When she stood up, her heart rate jumped up to like 160 beats per minute. It was like crazy. She like had to
Whoa.
drink blood. Yeah. So I don't know, something weird's going on there. Like legitimately,
Yeah,
like I don't know.
they do it because bodies lack energy or thing that said consuming blood can actually be very bad for you because you can like overdose on iron. But there are people who have iron deficiencies. But they also feed on energy, not just blood. Some vampires don't
Nice.
ingest human blood, but they claim to feed off the energy of others. Many state
Mm-hmm.
that if they don't feed regularly, they become agitated or depressed. Or, like you just said, if they decide not to feed, they can end up in the ER.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts though. It's like you're like, okay, dude, you're a vampire, but then like they don't eat blood and they end up in the ER, and you're like, wait, what? Wait a minute.
Whoa. How about a Snickers instead?
You're not you when you're hungry.
You're
Is
right.
that
Right?
the right catchphrase?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, but I think, I mean, with that, we're gonna get into, the popular culture.
I
The
mean,
popular culture,
before
dog.
I do have a little bit more to talk about the modern day vampires, if that's okay.
Ooh, share
Uh,
away.
yeah. How do we find
So,
these monsters and stake them through the heart?
oh gosh, well that's not what they want to do. They do have fangs though. Some of them do have fangs, just as like a cultural thing, because they've adopted a lot of the ideas, but only after they decide that they want to like be a vampire. So I mentioned earlier about how they can feed off of energy. So as Eli mentioned, blood is generally described by these self-proclaimed vampires as tasting metallic or coppery. But did you know the taste can also be influenced by the donor's physiology or even how well he or she is hydrated? Um, and then some of the psychic vampires use tantric feeding, that is through erotic or sexual encounters, while others use what could be described as astral feeding or feeding on another from afar, and others from emotion. So it's not all just about the blood, there are other properties as well. Um, I mentioned this a little earlier, but I wasn't actually reading the notes, so I kind of just like BS'd it. But I found it here. It says the community in general seems to have appropriated very few of the trappings mainstream culture attaches to creatures of the night. So they do sometimes dress in gothic clothing, but certainly not all the time. Very few sleep in coffins, and those vampires who do dress a certain way or wear fangs do so long after realizing their desire to take blood. And then I know that this all sounds a little bit weird, uh, but the guy who did this study, John Edgar, he did make it known in his article that, quote, unquestionably, I found the vampires I met to be competent and generally outwardly normal citizens. They performed blood letting rituals safely and only with willing donors and participated regularly in medical exams that scarcely, if ever, indicated complications from their practices.
Hmm.
Eh, eh.
Well, I mean, I don't know. What's the point of calling yourself a vampire if you're not going to sleep in a coffin?
I mean, you can also sleep in a coffin without being a vampire if you really want to.
Well, yeah, I know, but it's just like, hey, everyone, I'm a vampire. I like to suck blood. Oh, that's awesome. You sleep in a coffin? Gosh, no, that's so 17th century.
I know, but it's like you can really deck out coffins, dude.
Yeah,
You can really make
go
it
out, man.
comfy.
Listen, if you gotta drink blood, just own it, man. Just be like, yeah, you know what? Put on the cape, But got those little Gary
Yeah.
Oldman sunglasses from the movie, like
Yeah, a couple of people have filed their little fangs down. I don't know if you guys
Mhm.
saw that.
mm-hmm.
You know, that's cool. You
Uh,
know?
they also are. They have what they call local vampire houses, which is a group of vampires that's usually led by a vampire elder who helps his or her house members to acclimate to the nature.
Acclimate to their nature?
Yeah. So like newbie vampires, they're getting
Is it like a pledge system?
trained.
All right,
I
you
don't know.
worthless vampire pledges. This is Vampire House, all Alpha, Mega, no Beta, and you are gonna drop and give me 100. And they put them through Hell Week, and they haze them.
I mean, it makes sense to me. Like, if you're gonna like start a new practice or like a new way of keeping yourself healthy, I would want a mentor. I'd want somebody helping me out and leading and giving me advice and things like that. I'd want a supportive community, and that seems to be what they have.
I don't know. You think they walk around with like hydro flasks full of blood? You know, they go to the movies and they're just sipping on blood.
I mean, probably not because it does say that they conduct their feeding in private. They're not out like flaunting it.
I mean, you wouldn't know what's in the hydro flask.
I
You
mean,
could
I
say
guess
it's
that's
water.
true. I
Or
guess
if
They
you
don't check, dude.
you got those like novelty hats, like the soda straw novelty hat, just like a bunch of like redneck NASCAR vampires walking around.
Yeah, that would be entertaining for sure. But what else we got?
I think we can finally get into some pop culture.
Ooh.
Woo! All right, pop culture in one word. Dracula. Thank you very much. Have a
Good night, everybody.
I mean, it is true. Vampires became mainstream after Dracula published, Transylvanian Count, the supernatural abilities, including mind control and shapeshifting to prey upon innocent victims. Boom. There you
It
go.
actually,
It's like,
it wasn't even the book that made him popular.
was it the
You know,
movie?
The
it
stage
was
play.
our boy. Yeah, it was stage play, but I think it was really our boy Bela Lugosi who made it. The 1931 Universal movie that was like, yo, Dracula's on the
Yeah.
map, everybody.
They're like, listen, everyone, it's 1931. 2 years, your minds are going to be blown by a giant gorilla. But for the time being, let's just drop Frankenstein and Dracula in the same year.
Yeah, straight up, they did it.
That's crazy. Yeah,
And
I
the
mean,
Mummy.
oh yeah.
I think the Mummy came out the same year.
Mm-hmm.
They were just Universal came out of nowhere and was like, "We're dropping straight fire this year."
I was
1930.
I was at Spirit Halloween the other day, and they have these really cool vintage masks for the Mummy and vampires and Frankenstein. I mean, they're not Universal branded; they're general off-brand, Spirit Halloween masks,
Mhm.
but they're really cool. Like I can sit. They have Wolfman too, like a werewolf type
Oh,
thing.
Oh,
sick.
sick.
They're really sick. They're legit.
Heck yeah. Well, I mean, what's there to say about Dracula? Only that it's the most like well-known character I think of all time. I think Dracula holds the record for being the most filmed character.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because there's just so many Dracula movies. Because it's just
Oh,
like
I mean,
it's
yeah,
got that gravitas to it when you throw Dracula's name around.
yeah. What are some famous Dracula lords? We got Christopher Lee in there, Bela
Christopher
Lugosi,
Lee, Bela
obviously.
Lugosi. We got Franklin Langella.
Mm. Which
Um,
version of Dracula was he?
the 1970s something.
Oh,
Kind of
got
a
it.
fancy like 70s swinger Dracula, Hey,
Ooh,
I may live
nice.
forever, but so will disco. Blah.
uh, what else we got? We got our boy Gary Oldman.
Oh yeah, definitely. We
Uh,
got whoever that guy was in the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing one.
oh yeah, was Dracula in that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's really hard to remember that movie.
Dracula's trying to have a bunch of babies with his brides of Dracula, but they can't stay alive unless they use the electricity from the Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, weird. What?
Yeah, and then
I
also the
remember.
Wolfman
Yeah,
shows up.
yeah, that's right. And then, you have Luke Evans in the Dracula Untold, which I was a fan of. I liked that one. But and then they're already working on another Dracula movie. I think Blumhouse is gonna make it.
Oh, really?
Kind of like The Invisible Man. Yeah,
Hmm.
the legend lives on, man. It never ends, never dies.
Mm-hmm.
You know why? To quote a very scientific movie, The Goonies,
Mm-hmm.
legends never say die. So
People think that Dracula, I mean, there's a lot of debate about this. They think Dracula was inspired by Vlad the Impaler.
Oh, yeah. One of history's greatest heroes of all time.
depending on what your side you're on.
Yeah, right? Oh, man. Vlad the Impaler. Where do we begin? Well, maybe in the rain-soaked hellhole that is Transylvania.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't know Transylvania was a real place.
What?
Well, because the
Wow.
first time I ever really heard of it, listen, full disclosure here, I'm not as into the, monster history as much as you guys are. So like I knew of
Sure.
Dracula, but I didn't know anything about Dracula. And then that movie Hotel Transylvania came out and I was like, "Oh,
Oh, good.
cool." And I didn't know Transylvania was a real place. Oh, I'm exposing myself.
Yeah, that's where Dracula's castle is.
Mm-hmm. Up in the
I know,
Carpathian Mountains.
Transylvania, Romania.
And they're
And,
different
But yeah, I mean,
places.
there's a lot to unpack with Vlad the Impaler. I don't know how brief you guys want to be about it. If you guys want to take it away.
Look, well, he was captured as a child and raised
Mhm.
by the Ottoman Turks and trained how to be a killer. And then I can't remember if they let him go or he escaped
Mhm.
and assumed his role as ruler of Wallachia and slayed like so many Turks. He was also just a ruthless guy. He killed his own father in a duel.
Mhm.
You know, his dad was like, "Yo, you want to practice sword fighting?" He's like, "Sure." And then he killed his dad. So,
Wow.
I don't know. And then, yeah, Alex, take it
Oh,
away.
Vlad the Impaler. Oh, where do we begin? Well, Wallachia is where he was born.
Well, it's Wallachia.
I know. But yeah, Vlad the Impaler, um, great military strategy, killed thousands of people, known as a local hero in Romania, which is funny because to the rest of the world, he's this like blood thirsty monster, and over there, they're like, "Hey, that guy was pretty awesome." And
Yeah.
it would be it would be like to us, we're like, "Oh man, Abraham Lincoln, he was a pretty good guy. He did a lot of stuff." And then to the rest of
Oh,
the world, they
goodness.
just do him as this like monster that like killed thousands of people and like, you know, the dreaded Abraham Lincoln.
And then, Bram Stoker did what Tim Burton did to Abe Lincoln. Well, I guess Abe Lincoln became a vampire slayer, and Bram Stoker was like, Vlad the Impaler. Yes, that makes, yeah, Dracula. Yes, he's a vampire. Just
It's
out of the blue.
it's this perfect storm of you have you have Vlad the Impaler. He's also known as Dracul, which translates to son of the dragon.
Oh, yes.
And they talk about he would impale people, and then he would sit there at a table with food, eating while he watched all these people be impaled and dying. And he would stick people on the ceiling and on the walls, and there was just these bleeding corpses everywhere. And when foreign dignitaries would come and visit, there's a story that some guy was like, "Oh my gosh, the smell in this castle! How do you stand it?" And Vlad's like, "Oh, the smell offends you, eh?" And he took out a sword and he cuts the guy's nose off. He's like, "Well, it doesn't
Jeez.
offend me anymore."
Well, I mean, I read that he also would like not only does he enjoy dining amidst his dying victims, but he also would like dip his bread in their blood and eat it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, guy was pretty savage. I mean,
It's
Mhm.
funny because I remember growing up because I watched a lot of the Universal monster movies growing up, and oh Dracula, that wasn't Dracula compared to like Frankenstein, a Wolfman creature. He's okay. He's kind of bland, on first appearance, but then you get more into the character and there's a lot going on. And I found out that he was based on a real guy, and it blew my mind at the time.
yeah.
Mhm.
Like, oh my gosh, Dracula was real? Oh man.
I mean, there is
I,
debate about whether these stories are even true or if Dracula
mm,
was inspired by Vlad the Impaler, but that's the route people like to
uh,
take.
as far as I can tell, because I mean, the book does mention the Bram Stoker's book does mention Vlad the Impaler, by his actual name, Vlad Tepes. You know, he did come across his name, but up until his book, there was absolutely no association with Vlad the Impaler being a vampire at all.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's just a complete
Rewriting of
complete rewriting of the history. And then, speaking of history, may I add, I started this year by reading a book called The Historian, which posits that Bram Stoker made up everything about Dracula. That Dracula is a completely fictional book, but that Dracula is a real person and he is actually Vlad Tepes and he's still out in the world. And then they kill Dracula in that book. Sorry to spoil it, but like, I mean, is it really a spoiler? It's a book about Dracula. Uh, but I don't know. It was okay, I guess. It was a lot of build up, and the end was just like, and then he's dead.
yeah.
The end. And I was like, what? All right. You know, it's like kind of like how the Universal movie ends. You know,
Mhm.
but like they do not show his body at the end. They show up in his little house at Carfax and they put the nail, you know, they're like, "Oh, look, he's in there." And they nail it in, you know, with their one wide shot and then they're like, "He's dead." And then it's the end. And you're like, "You're not even gonna cut to his body?" Or like, "What?" For all I
That
know, you guys just nailed it down to the bottom of an empty box.
yeah. That'd be like, this is spoiler territory, so head with your own regards, but it's about the Avengers movie. To
Oh
where
dear.
imagine at the end of Endgame, to where Tony Stark, he snaps his finger, he says, "I'm Iron Man," and they're like, "Oh wow, Thanos is totally dead." The end. Just all this
Yeah.
build up, all this stuff, and just like, well, he died. Goodbye.
Yeah, it's basically how it is, dude. But yeah. Enough of all that.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
I'd like to add, we talked about Vlad the Impaler, obviously a real person whose insane bloody history inspired, a lot of, what we kind of think of vampires and Dracula. There's another historical person who helped influence it, and it was the Countess Elizabeth Bathory.
Ooh.
yes.
And I don't know if you guys know too much about her.
Mm-mm.
So she was a Hungarian noblewoman. She was a Hungarian noblewoman. She was born August 1560, so it was like the 15th century, and she had she holds the record by the Guinness World Records of being the most prolific female murderer in history. Even though the number is up to debate, but what she would do is she lived in this big castle, and she'd send down to the village peasant girls to come work for her, servants. And so she'd amass this big crew of young maids, and then one by one she'd invite them into her secret chambers. They're thinking, oh, we're going to get a promotion. Maybe instead of being the chambermaid, we get to be the breakfast maid. You never know. And then she'd grab them, slit their neck, let the blood shoot out, and then she'd bathe in it to stay forever young.
Ew.
Yeah, so she would bathe in the blood, and she claimed that it would keep her forever young and forever pretty. And this went on for a while till finally the village people were like, "Hey, there's no more girls around here. What happened?" Oh, they keep going up to the Elizabeth Bathory's castle, so they stormed.
Oh.
They probably had pitchforks and torches for good measure, because that's what every angry mob needs. They broke down the door and they said, "All right, we've had enough of your crap." And then they grabbed her and they buried her alive in the own walls of her castle.
Dang. That's pretty savage. Oh, I feel like we should mention Anne Rice's books. Most specifically Interview with a Vampire, which got turned into a movie with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. But
I think that kind of changed how people looked at vampires, for sure.
Right. Oh yeah, because now he wasn't, they're always monsters. That they weren't, romantic figures, sexy vampires.
Yeah, they're like tortured pretty boys.
Yeah.
It's funny too. It's funny too, because Anne Rice's novel, I think that came out maybe the late 80s or so. The movie came out early 90s. Because it's funny, because the 80s, vampires were all over the place in horror movies. Because you had this movie called The Lost Boys. I don't know if you heard of that one. Yeah, where it takes place in Santa Carlo, California. And it's kind of like, yeah, and they filmed it at Santa Cruz, actually. And there's the boardwalk there. And it's just like, all right, it's the 80s. Everything's kind of cool. And then it's just like, well, what if it was like cool 80s vampires? And there were a bunch of like teenage vampires, and Kiefer Sutherland's like the leader.
Really?
Yeah, and the two Corys show up.
The two Corys. That's vampire movies that I have seen. I haven't seen a lot. I haven't watched a lot of vampire productions, but The Lost Boys is one that my family enjoys.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I highly recommend it. And there's one of my other favorite 80s horror movies is called Fright Night. It was remade like in like 2012 or so, but the original one is about this kid. He's he's kind of a nerd. He watches old horror TV shows, and then one day a new neighbor moves in next door, and he sees that they're bringing in a coffin, and the guy is only active at night, and he thinks he's got a vampire on his hands. So he turns to the only person he can find help with, the TV show horror host, who's a washed-up actor who used to be in vampire movies.
Huh.
And it's awesome. That movie is really, really good. It has one of my favorite parts too, because we mentioned early on, to where if you gotta fend off a vampire, hold up a crucifix, and that'll scare him, And so there's a point where the kid goes and he's trying to confront the vampire, because he's like, and the vampire's like, "Yeah, what are you gonna do, kid? You can't stop me." And he holds out the cross, and the vampire goes, "You fool! You gotta have faith for that to work." And he grabs the cross and he throws it.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
What about the old Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Dude, did you guys know Pedro Pascal is in an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
I did not.
Is he?
He is.
Whoa.
My roommate has been watching Buffy for the past couple. She's not watching it consistently anymore, but she was watching it like every day for a while in the middle of quarantine. And I knew that Pedro was in an episode, and I was like, what are the chances that the episode he's in will be on when I'm in the living room? And I was out there, and he appeared on screen, and I was like, look, it's Pedro Pascal! And my roommate was like, it is? I'm like, yeah. She's like, that does not look like him. And I'm like, yeah, because they look white.
Dang. Old Pedro, huh? What's he up to?
The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he stopped showing up this set or whatever the rumor is.
I don't know if I believe that rumor.
Well, this is where I stand with it. Mandalorian season 2 comes out this month. I think it's a little late to, be shooting the show, you know. So I don't, yeah, I would be, okay with him not showing up to set anymore because I would be worried if he still was. Uh, Pretty
Well,
sure
I mean,
production's over.
if there's one show that the main actor cannot show up, it's The Mandalorian because he's always in a costume.
That is true.
Yeah, there's rumors talking about how his stunt person's gonna be in the costume and he's just gonna do voiceovers or something like that. I don't know. I don't read into the hype, man. I just want to watch the show.
I just want to get some chicky nuggies and watch the show.
Chicken nuggies.
Well, I mean, is there any other real examples for pulp culture? Because vampires
What We
are
Do in the
everywhere.
Shadows.
Ooh.
I've been wanting to see that.
Okay, so there's the movie What We Do in the
Mhm.
Shadows,
Mhm.
directed by Taika Waititi. If you don't know
Love
who that is,
him.
think of Thor Ragnarok. He's got a lot of like really good movies out.
Oh yeah.
but,
If you don't know the name, just think of good movies from the past 5 years, and it's probably him.
yeah, seriously. And What We Do in the Shadows is basically an office-style mockumentary at a look in the lives of, some vampires that live in New Zealand. And then it was so successful that they made it into a TV show, which I
Mhm.
was a little bit skeptical about. I was like, I don't know if this is going to be any good. But let me tell you, that became one of my favorite shows real fast.
Mm.
Uh,
Oh, it's
that
good.
show's pretty. Oh, it's good, man. The season 2 especially. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, they
It's
they really did something.
it's funny too because the original What We Do in Shadows, it follows 3 you could say like archetype vampires, to where there's the Vlad the Impaler type one. You
Yeah.
have the Anne Rice type one, to where he's like the guy who was turned, like Tom Cruise was, so he's kind of fancy and kind of like,
Yeah.
kind of he wears like the old like puffy shirts and stuff.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's my favorite.
Yeah. And then there's the guy who was a villager, right? Like a peasant who was turned
Yeah.
into a vampire. And then they have a
Yeah.
Nosferatu living in the basement.
Yeah. His name's Steve, right? Or something like
Yeah,
that. Or
Steve. And that's great because it's like, oh well, those are your 4 main vampire types. And then when they were doing the show, they're like, well, we're doing a show. It's like, oh, I don't know what kind of vampires you could follow it up with. But the show is great because you have the main guy who is he like Persian?
yeah, I think he's a Persian dude, but
Mm-hmm. He's like
yeah.
almost, wasn't he like a conqueror or something? He was like a king or something. So
Yeah.
he's super kind of uptight and like he's kind of silly.
Well,
And
it's funny because, they talk about his past as a warrior and a pretty savage dude, but he's
Mhm.
also like this very effeminate, kind of almost dainty type of guy. But,
Mhm.
you know,
So
uh,
you have him, and then you have like the kind of Elizabeth Bathory type, like she was like a countess, like
oh yeah.
vampire. And then
Yes.
her mate, who I think was like a peasant boy that she turned into, but he's supposed to be like, I think 50 or like 18 or something, but he looks like a 45-year-old man.
What?
Uh,
The other main lead? I thought he was like a nobleman or something.
I thought
I
he
don't,
was like I thought they said he was like just like a young guy in a village, but like he was considered like the youngest, most attractive guy. He's just kind of like a short, chubby guy.
Yeah, he's my favorite though,
Oh,
honestly.
he's
He's
so
so
funny.
funny.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. They have my favorite skit of all time, the Jackie Daytona, he goes on the run and assumes an American identity and he puts a toothpick in his mouth and no one can recognize who he is. Like he's like, this is my signature disguise, and they have like these old portraits of him just with the toothpick in his mouth. He looks the same, but he's got the toothpick in his mouth and it's a disguise. No one can recognize him. And he becomes like this bartender in this town, and he's like, donating all this money to the to the volleyball team in the small town, and everyone loves him. They're like, he's Jackie Daytona.
And then the best addition, I think, to the show is the fourth vampire that they live with, who isn't your traditional bloodsucker. We mentioned him earlier. He's like a
Oh, yeah.
psychic vampire, like energy vampire. And while everyone else
yes.
still wears like their old fancy clothes and the old style, he's just like a modern guy who works at like an office, and he has like a tie, and he wears glasses, and he can walk around in the daytime. He just goes around like sucking the life out of office workers.
Oh my goodness, yes.
It's and all the other
Oh, man.
vampires are very like uncomfortable around him, which is amazing.
Well, because he can drain them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, remember Jonah Hill's sisters in the show too,
Oh yeah.
for
There-
like
there's
2 episodes.
Everyone in that show is really good.
Oh yeah, highly recommend. Go watch.
Please.
But I mean, wow, we could go on for days.
Oh boy, we could go on for eternity like vampires themselves.
If any of you listeners know any vampires, let me know. I'm trying to smear myself in their blood so I can become a vampire.
Good lord.
You know?
Yeah, if you know any vampires, ask them how many fingernails they grow in their lifetime so far, because they seem to grow new ones.
Yeah, I guess so, huh? I guess just when they die, right? Then you have to have a rebirthing period, and you just kind of shed your skin like a snake. You lose all your nails.
you get rid of all your old fluids as well.
Yeah. Just get rid of it all. Start your new life as a vampire.
Everything
You
must
know?
go.
Here's where I struggle with it, though. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm gonna be a vampire, I want to be an intellectual. I want to read, all the books I didn't have time for when I was alive. I want to watch all the movies, you know?
Yeah.
But, like, if I'm just gonna be some raging animal beast who sucks on human blood, I don't want to be a vampire, bro. I don't.
Yeah, what's the difference between just modern day life?
Oh, my. Oh, good lord. But if I want to find, these cluckheads who I've been listening to for the past, 2 hours about vampires, where do I go for that?
Oh yeah. Well, if you want to find me, I am Alex Daikaiju. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Alex Daikaiju. Alex Daikaiju. My Instagram, I post a lot of monster and cryptid related art, and we're entering the spooky Halloween time, so I'll be posting some spooky Halloween art. And
Ooh,
oh
you
yeah,
better
look
draw a
forward to.
vampire, dude.
Oh, I'm gonna draw like 2.5
Okay.
because there's a lady who loses her legs and flies around.
Yeah, that's right. 2.5.
And my sources today, I used the Dreadnought Wikipedia. I used Scientific American blog, and I used it's called bogleech.com. It's I highly recommend it. It's a website. This guy runs it. He covers everything from monsters, video game monsters, Halloween, all kind. If you want spooky content, definitely check it out. And if I wanted to find more about Jasmine May With and her obsession with Pedro Pascal, how would I do so?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. My name is the same on both. Jasmine Maywith, JasmineMaewith. Today, my information. Usually, I have a really long list. The list is pretty brief this time because all of these sources had lots of information. I looked at the History Channel, National Geographic, Smithsonian Magazine, Britannica, and then Carlin Betch's book, Monstrous, The Lore and Gore and Science Behind Your Favorite Monsters.
Ooh, yeah. That's a good book, too. Highly recommend.
Oh yes, and
And
check out our interview with Carlin.
oh, yeah.
It's a long time ago. If you
Yeah,
scroll
she was
back,
our
you'll find
first
it.
interview.
Oh yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she really was, huh? Wow.
Wow. We could stroll down memory lane forever, but the man who's going to speak next needs to get to bed. So, Eli, take it away.
Oh, yes. Hello, my name is Eli Watson. You can find me on the Instagrams and the Twitters at the Eli Watson. My sources for today come from Britannica.com, ancientegyptonline.co.uk, oprahmag.com. I don't recommend oprahmag.com for all your vampire, information, but it came up, so.
Aw.
Biblicalarchaeology.org, the Wikipedia, Gutenberg.org, which ironically I did not share my quote from that website, so did I use it or not? cs.mcgill.ca, nationalpost.com, spookyisles.com, davidfarrant.org, paranormal.lovetoknow.com, strangedays.co.uk, and my brain. And yes, and if you are like, yo, this was an awesome episode, I'm so happy these guys are like finally done talking, check us out. Check us out on our social medias, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Find us at Cryptid Campfire. Pretty easy to find. Check out our website, cryptidcampfire.com. You can get yourself a snazzy t-shirt there. It comes in colors, in blood red for those of you who seek to be vampires.
Oh, yeah.
Personally, red is my favorite color. I don't know about y'all, but let's see what else we got here. Patreon. We're active on the Patreon. Me and Alex are going to be doing some spooky episodes this month. So,
Oh, yeah.
for $5 a month, you get access to at least 2 exclusive episodes every month, as well as a wallpaper Alex draws for us, and I'm telling you, man, they get better every single month. So I'm excited to
yes.
see what comes out this month.
I'm excited to unleash a new wallpaper.
Oh, yes. And be sure that you're there and ready to receive it because it's coming. And I think with that, I think we're all donezo,
Thank
you know,
God, this episode's so long.
I know. Be sure to add me on Xbox. No, just kidding. I'm joking.
Yeah. Check us out on Twitch, on YouTube. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah, right.
It was fun though, guys.
Oh yeah,
It was fun.
It was a barrel of undead vampires.
Oh, good Lord. I know, dude. Jeez. But,
And
with that said and done, we've got another one in the bag. We got another spooky episode coming at you next week. Expect it. Expect the spook.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
And fare thee well.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover